Everyone thought it was a joke, a teenage boy walking into court, claiming he was the defense. The judge mocked him. The crowd laughed. But by the end of the trial, that same boy exposed a hidden conspiracy, embarrassed a veteran prosecutor, and proved an innocent man's life had nearly been destroyed. This is the jaw-dropping true story of a 16-year-old legal genius who turned the justice system on its head. The courtroom went silent. "You're in the wrong room, son," the judge scoffed, not bothering to look up from his bench. The statement, soaked in sarcasm, echoed through the large wooden chamber. Heads turned. Eyebrows rose. Gasps floated across the courtroom like whispers in the wind. The doors had just creaked open, revealing someone no one expected to see. A teenager. A boy. Maybe 16 tops. He wasn't wearing a suit like the lawyers. No polished shoes. No briefcase. No clipboard. He wore a plain beige t-shirt, faded jeans, and a pair of old sneakers that squeaked slightly against the marble floor. The courtroom had been brimming with tension already. This was a high-stakes trial involving a school theft case, and the defendant was facing up to 5 years in prison. But when this young boy walked in, the mood shifted from tense to confused. People began whispering. "Who is that? Is he lost? Is this some kind of prank?" But the boy didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight, calm and confident, as if he'd done this 100 times before. In his hand, he carried a thin folder, nothing fancy, just a stack of printed papers held together by a single black clip. Not a single lawyer in the room had ever seen him before. Still, he walked with purpose. Without saying a word, he reached the defense table and placed the file gently beside the man sitting there, the defendant, Mr. Henry Carter. A tired-looking janitor in his 50s with calloused hands and worry in his eyes. The boy pulled out the chair next to him and sat down, smoothing the papers. Finally, he looked up, straight at the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice firm but respectful. "I'm representing Mr. Carter today." The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Even the bailiff's hand froze mid-motion as he reached for his clipboard. The judge blinked and slowly leaned forward, finally getting a good look at the boy. "You're what?" "I'm representing the defendant," the boy repeated, standing up from his seat this time. "Mr. Carter has been denied fair legal representation due to lack of resources. As a legal advocate under the state's Pro Se Assistance Act, I'm stepping in with his permission." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. This must be some kind of joke. He chuckled, waiting for someone to tell him he was being pranked. Maybe a news crew was about to burst out from behind the doors with cameras and confetti. But no one laughed. The boy didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply pulled a folded document from his folder and handed it to the bailiff. "Here is the official approval signed by Mr. Carter and notarized by a district clerk this morning. Page 2 cites the relevant statute." The judge took the papers, half expecting them to be fake. But as he read the first few lines, the color began to drain from his face. Everything was in order. Legally, the boy had every right to be there. The gallery behind them, filled with teachers, parents, and school officials, began to buzz with low murmurs again. Is this real? Is he actually going to argue the case? Where are his parents? But none of that mattered to the boy. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here for attention. He was here for justice. Mr. Carter leaned in toward the boy and whispered, "Are you sure about this, kid?" The boy gave a calm nod. "I've read your entire case, file 6 times. I know you didn't do it, and I know how to prove it." The judge cleared his throat, still slightly stunned. "You understand this is a real trial, don't you? Not a school project or some debate club." "Yes, Your Honor," the boy replied. "And I've come prepared." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Very well. If everything checks out, I won't stop you. But be warned, this is a court of law. One wrong move, and I'll hold you in contempt." The boy didn't flinch. "I understand, sir." The judge tapped his gavel lightly on the bench. "Then let's proceed." The room buzzed again. Lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Reporters in the back clicked their pens, now fully alert. No one could believe what they were witnessing. A teenager, barely old enough to drive, about to go head-to-head with trained prosecutors. But as the boy opened his folder and began laying out his evidence, his calm, calculated movements told everyone in the room one thing. This was no ordinary teenager, and this would be no ordinary trial. Who is this kid? Whispers filled the courtroom, echoing off the wooden walls like a rising storm. People were still reeling from what they had just seen, a teenager stepping into a courtroom not as a witness, not as a defendant, but as a legal representative. Who is this kid? Someone whispered from the gallery. Is he serious? Where are his parents? But behind the curious stares and confused murmurs, one thing was becoming clear. This wasn't just some bold prank or publicity stunt. This kid knew what he was doing. His name was Jordan Miles. No law degree, no prestigious university on his resume, no expensive suits or legal firm backing him. Just a plain t-shirt, a calm voice, and a mind sharper than most adults in the room. From the moment he spoke, there was something different about him. Not just confidence, clarity. His words didn't ramble. His statements didn't hesitate. He addressed the judge, quoted case law, cited statutes, and did it all with the calm of someone who had spent years in this environment. And in a way, he had. Jordan wasn't a normal teenager. While most kids his age were spending their weekends on video games or social media, Jordan had his nose buried in legal books. Not because someone made him, but because he wanted to. His obsession began early. At just 9 years old, Jordan stumbled across an old courtroom drama on TV. Something about the way the lawyer fought for justice turned the odds, and one truthfully lit a fire in his heart. He started asking questions. What's the Constitution? What's due process? What does beyond a reasonable doubt mean? At first, his parents thought it was just a phase. But then came the books. By 11, Jordan had checked out nearly every legal reference book from the local library. He read state laws, criminal codes, court transcripts. He didn't just memorize them. He understood them. His memory was photographic, and his passion unstoppable. But he didn't stop at reading. By 13, Jordan began volunteering at community legal aid centers. He wasn't allowed to argue in court, of course, but he could assist, helping adults who couldn't afford representation understand the basics of their rights, draft statements, or prepare for hearings. And by 15, he had helped 2 individuals win civil disputes in small claims court, both involving tenant rights, both times against trained attorneys. Judges were baffled. Opposing parties were stunned. Word began to spread. There's this kid who knows the law better than most lawyers. But nothing could have prepared him for today. This wasn't small claims court. This wasn't a civil dispute over rent or noise complaints. This was a criminal case. The defendant was Mr. Henry Carter, a soft-spoken janitor at a local public high school, a man known for staying late to mop the halls, fixing broken lockers, and bringing candy to kids on Fridays. A man who had never even received a parking ticket. And yet, here he was, facing a felony charge for allegedly stealing thousands of dollars worth of equipment from the school's storage room. The case looked bad. No surveillance footage had been reviewed, the paperwork was rushed, and the school board was eager to set an example. Mr. Carter couldn't afford a lawyer. Legal aid was swamped. Every attorney he contacted wanted thousands just to review his case. He was ready to give up until he met Jordan. Jordan had overheard his story at a local community event, and something about it didn't sit right. So he dug in. He requested public records, reviewed the arrest file, and went to the school board posing as a student journalist to gather additional information. What he found shocked him. Missing timestamps, a lack of key witnesses, and a questionable accusation made by someone with a hidden connection to the stolen equipment. It didn't take long for Jordan to realize this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It was a setup. So, he did what no one else dared to. He stepped up. He filed for permission under the Pro Se Assistance Act, a rare legal provision that allowed non-licensed individuals to assist a defendant in certain cases, especially when the defendant had no access to proper representation. After several formalities, paperwork, and hours of preparation, the court finally granted him approval. And now here he was, a teenager, standing beside a man everyone had abandoned, ready to go head-to-head against a seasoned prosecutor. Everyone doubted Mr. Carter. Everyone assumed the case was open and shut. Everyone, except Jordan Miles. Because Jordan didn't just believe in law, he believed in justice. And he was about to prove that age, titles, and appearances meant nothing when the truth was on your side. Mockery turns to shock. The judge leaned back in his tall leather chair, arms folded, clearly skeptical. "You're telling me you're a licensed attorney?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. His tone was laced with sarcasm, like a father humoring a child who just claimed he could drive a plane. Jordan didn't blink. "No, sir," he replied calmly. "I'm not a licensed attorney, but I'm here today under the court's approval to assist the defendant as a legal advocate. It's within my rights under the state's Pro Se Assistance Act, Section 47C. He said it like he'd said it 100 times. A hush rippled through the room. It was the second time in 10 minutes the boy had stunned the courtroom with his confidence and command of the law. Several people leaned in to whisper, "Did he just cite statute? Wait, is that even real? How does he know this stuff?" The judge, caught slightly off guard, blinked once and looked down at the file in front of him. Sure enough, there it was, the signed authorization, the court clerk's approval, the defendant's consent. All legal, all airtight. Still, the judge smirked, shaking his head slightly. "Fine," he said, a trace of disbelief in his voice. "Let's see what you've got." Jordan nodded, then stepped forward. He didn't have a laptop. No flashlight, not even a notepad. Just his thoughts, his preparation, and an almost frightening level of recall. With his hands calmly at his sides, he began his opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today because a man, Mr. Henry Carter, is being blamed for a crime he did not commit. The evidence you will see, or more importantly, the evidence you have not been shown, will make that very clear." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Each word felt measured, purposeful. The courtroom leaned in, hanging on his every sentence. He continued, laying out the timeline of events, when the theft occurred, who had access, who had keys, and who was conveniently never questioned. He mentioned missing surveillance footage, gaps in the report, and a lack of proper chain of custody for the stolen items. The prosecutor stood up abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is speculating." Jordan turned to the judge, not missing a beat. "Your Honor, I am simply establishing context, as permitted in an opening statement. I will support each claim with evidence and witness testimony as the trial proceeds." The judge nodded slowly. "Overruled. Continue." Jordan turned back to the jury without so much as a sigh of relief. This was where he thrived, not in showing off, but in showing up. He continued with perfect poise, quoting a previous court case, Mason versus State, 2009, where a lack of proper surveillance footage led to a wrongful conviction. He used the citation not only accurately, but persuasively, tying it directly to Mr. Carter's situation. Again, the prosecutor objected. Again, Jordan calmly responded with clear precedent. "No anger, no panique, just facts." By this point, the judge had sat forward, hands folded in front of his mouth, watching closely. His earlier smirk had vanished. In the gallery, people were leaning on the edges of their seats. A woman in a suit nudged her colleague. "He's doing better than half the lawyers I've seen," she whispered. Jordan's voice never cracked. He wasn't speaking like someone trying to prove a point. He was speaking like someone on a mission. He wasn't just defending Mr. Carter. He was dismantling the prosecution's entire case, piece by piece, like a chess player who had already thought 20 moves ahead. And it wasn't just what he was saying, it was how he was saying it. "No grandstanding, no melodrama. Just calm, razor-sharp precision." And then came the moment that turned murmurs into murmured awe. Jordan turned to the jury and said, "You will hear from the school administrator who filed the complaint, but you won't hear why his nephew, a student recently suspended for theft, was in the building after hours the same night of the incident, because that wasn't included in the initial report. But I'll show you why it matters." Boom. Gasps. The prosecutor stiffened. His expression changed from annoyed to alarmed. He hadn't expected this. No one had. What had started as a joke, a judge mocking a teenager for entering a courtroom, was now turning into a clinic in courtroom strategy. Jordan sat down quietly, organizing his papers. No fist pump, no wink, just a nod to Mr. Carter. The older man, still in disbelief, whispered, "You sure you're only 16? Jordan gave a slight smile. "Feels like I've been preparing for this my whole life." And the courtroom, for the first time that day, believed him. The truth comes out, and then it happened. The moment that changed everything. Up until now, Jordan had impressed the courtroom with his knowledge and composure. But what he did next didn't just surprise them. It shattered the entire narrative of the prosecution's case. "Your Honor," Jordan said, rising from his seat, "I'd like to submit new evidence for the court's consideration. CCTV footage from the East Hallway security camera of Lincoln High School, time-stamped the night of the alleged theft." The prosecutor stood immediately. "Objection. This footage wasn't part of the original evidence submission." Jordan turned calmly. "It wasn't included because it was never requested by the investigating officers. However, under the state's Digital Transparency Act, I filed a public access motion for the footage. It was recovered and time-stamped 2 nights ago. The court clerk has a copy." All eyes shifted to the clerk, who nodded and handed the USB drive to the bailiff. The judge allowed it. As the screen lit up, the footage rolled. There was grainy but clear. A figure walked down the school's hallway just minutes before the theft was said to have occurred. Not Mr. Carter. Not even close. It was another teenager, wearing a school jacket, hoodie pulled halfway up, slipping into the locker room with something tucked under his arm. Jordan paused the video and zoomed in. "That," he said, pointing, "is Kyle Bennett, the vice principal's nephew. Previously suspended for petty theft and the only student with unsupervised after-hours access, thanks to his family connection." Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He scrambled through his notes, flipping pages, visibly panicked. But Jordan wasn't done. "I'd also like to call a witness," he said. "Mr. Ravi Desai, the school's IT technician." The technician, a quiet man in glasses, took the stand. Jordan approached. "Mr. Desai, can you tell the court why this footage wasn't available earlier?" Desai cleared his throat. "It was flagged for deletion after a system update. I didn't realize it had been wiped until I received a formal request from this young man, asking me to retrieve it from the recovery logs. If he hadn't asked, it would have been lost permanently." More murmurs. Heads turned. The puzzle was solving itself right in front of everyone. Jordan had uncovered not only a key suspect, but also proven that critical evidence had been overlooked, or maybe even intentionally hidden. The prosecutor, flustered and sweating now, fumbled with his pen. We weren't aware." "You weren't looking," Jordan interrupted politely. The judge, who once rolled his eyes at the mere sight of the teen, now leaned forward with laser focus. His hands were steepled in front of his mouth, his eyes locked on Jordan like he was watching a prodigy in action. In one afternoon, a boy dismissed as a joke had flipped an entire criminal case on its head. And the truth, it was finally coming out, loud and clear. The verdict and the apology. The courtroom had been tense for hours. Jurors leaned on their elbows. The prosecutor sat stone-faced. The gallery was silent, breath held, as if the entire room had forgotten how to exhale. Finally, the judge spoke. His voice was steady, but there was something new in his tone: respect. "I've presided over hundreds of cases," he said slowly, eyes fixed on Jordan. "And I have never, not once, seen someone your age, or any age, display such extraordinary command of the courtroom." He paused. The silence was deafening. "I owe you an apology," he continued. "I judge you by your age, by your clothes, by your face. I assumed you were here by mistake. I was wrong." Then he added, with a faint smile, "That won't happen again." Jordan gave a respectful nod, emotion flickering briefly in his eyes, but he kept his cool. The judge turned to the jury. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A woman stood, holding a small slip of paper. "We have, Your Honor." She handed it to the bailiff. The judge opened it and read, "Not guilty." A wave of relief and emotion broke across the room. Mr. Carter, the man who had nearly lost everything, broke down in tears, shaking as he turned to Jordan and hugged him. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. "You saved my life." Jordan just smiled. As the courtroom emptied, the hallway outside burst into life. Reporters swarmed. "Who are you? Will you study law professionally?" Jordan chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "That's the plan," he said. "But first, I've got algebra homework." And just like that, the boy genius, who came and mocked, walked out a legend.